Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
Today, we welcome back on the show Roger Martin for a special episode where we discuss his latest book, A New Way to Think. And don't forget, stick around to the end for a post-pod discussion.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
So I guess we should introduce Roger Martin. Thanks again for joining us again on the podcast, Roger. This is just awesome.
It's my pleasure, Mark.
It's such an honor for us. So you've got a new book coming out called A New Way to Think, and it's amazing. It's really an amazing book. There's this one quote that I saw in here. It was talking about from Stephanie Cohen, who's the global co-head of consumer wealth management, Goldman Sachs. She said it was like ways for executive leadership, which I thought was such a really interesting way, because as I was reading through some of the sections in the book, there's parts where I was just like, this is the roadmap. Like, I can take this section and build a workshop out of it. Or, it's very practical, the book.
Well, thank amazing. You.
It's so good.
Thank you. My beloved academic mentor, the late Chris Argyris, would be happy. He was into practical knowledge. He said, knowledge upon which you can't take action is hardly worth having it at all. And so thank you. That's the highest praise you can give to me, that you could go and do something with it. And it's also Peter Drucker, right? Peter Drucker, also a friend and a mentor. If you would say to him, oh, Peter, that was great meeting. Thank you. He would say, don't tell me it was a great meeting. Tell me what you're going to do Monday morning. Right. Yeah. And so those two guys had a big influence on me. If I can't give advice that I think the person on the receiving end can take action on, like immediately, then I haven't done a good job. That's my view. So thank you for that. Thank you for
that. Is a great line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is a great line.
V, you had one about Tom Peters that you liked as well, right?
Yeah. Honestly, I'll just read it quickly verbatim, where it says, I suggest that you post a contents page on your work or home office wall and use it as an all you need to know daily checklist to spur action. I mean, that in summary for me is exactly what this did. Literally, I've created another document where I have all the content, and then I've added notes underneath every single one, because that for me is the checklist. It's fantastic.
Terrific. That is great. You'll have to send it to me. I'd love to see your checklist.
Of course.
So I got so excited about talking about the book and the things that we're going to be talking about today. I kind of forgot to introduce you just as a formality. That's okay. So let's just do that real quick. But you're the a strategy advisor for a trusted advisor for companies like P&G, Lego, and Ford. Author of this is now 13 books, I believe. Is that right?
That is number 13. Yeah.
On a variety of topics, and this book actually covers a lot of those topics, like M&A and capital investment, talent, competition, innovation, I mean, it's a broad swath, but I mean, there's so many practical good tips in this book, and in all your work. Over the last 10 years, you've been in the top 10, I believe, or top 7 as the Thinkers 50 list is, the best management thinkers in the world. In 2017, considered to be the number 1 management thinker in the world. Formerly the dean of the Rotman School of Business. And then, people, as we talked about Peter Drucker, people have called you the Peter Drucker of our generation, which I think is great.
That's very
great
kind.
fit for you.
Very fit.
And so in our last podcast, which we're still kind of reeling over and excited about that we get to chat with you then, we covered some of these topics without knowing the new book was coming out, which is how we ended up in this conversation.
Right.
So
yes.
In the last one, we talked about innovation, maybe up to the same degree in depth that you have in the book. We talked about stakeholders. Yeah. We talked about shareholder versus stakeholder. And then we talked about data. And so in this conversation, we thought we'd cover some of the sections in depth and not cover the whole book. But customers, knowledge work, strategy planning, execution for us was super interesting and thought relevant for the audience that we have. So we thought we'd dig in there.
Sounds good to me. Dig away.
Okay. All right. So one of the things I thought was great about the book also is the idea that there's a quote from, I think it's George Box, that all models are wrong and some are useful.
Yes.
And the book really kind of digs into in these sections, the existing dominant model that sort of forms thinking. And then you propose an alternative or an improvement or a build on some of those things and challenge why there's the need to look at that. So in the customer section, you talked about sort of the dominant models that, a lot of companies would say that, we're very focused on customer centricity. It's, the key to our success and long-term sustainable advantage. And then a lot of people are obsessed about converting customers into rabid, loyal fans. And so they do that by, partly by maintaining relevance through differentiated experiences and targeted segments of customers who then make logical choices to choose me over this one. And so you kind of spin that on its head, I would say, and kind of articulate why that's not necessarily the right way to think about customers. Can you kind of expand on that?
Sure. So some of what you said is absolutely what you should do with customers. I mean, you better have a great offering, whether it's a product or a service for them that meets their needs. If you don't do that, you've got nothing going for yourself. So that part is important. But what people these days kind of overestimate is the value of loyalty. And loyalty is a conscious concept, right? It's like, Mark, you say this, I don't know, whatever. The company that cleans my shirts does a great job. And so I'm going to be loyal to them. I'm not going to, when I get a flyer from somebody else, come bring in your shirts for laundering here. I'm not going to do that because I'm loyal to my existing provider, right? It just turns out that over the last 15 or 20 years, the behavioral research has been super clear on the fact that that's not how Mark thinks. What Mark does is develop a habit of going to his favorite laundry place. And it becomes the easiest thing to do, the most comfortable thing to do. And so without actually thinking about it, it's almost like an automaton. You get in your car and drive to that place and dump your shirts off the way you always have. And that is not loyalty, that's habit. It's something that your subconscious kind of encourages you. It's as though your subconscious is having a dialogue with your conscious saying, don't think, Mark, don't think. The shirts have always come back. We know exactly where to park. We know exactly what the name of the person is. We know exactly how much it's going to cost. We know exactly when it's going to be ready. It's going to look exactly like this in the box or in the hanger. Please, Mark, do not think about driving anywhere else or buying from anywhere else. Don't. So that subconscious is like an iceberg. It's the 95% of the iceberg that's below the water that you don't see. And if you focus on the 5% above, you're not going to do the sorts of things that make that habit incredibly strong. And what I would argue is that the value, the huge asset on the balance sheet of every company that should be on the balance sheet but is hidden there is habits.
Yeah.
How many customers have you as a habit, and you are therefore the default of that customer? So think habits over loyalty.
Mm-hmm. There's so many things within that, and it kind of, so going back to that idea that all models are wrong, but some are useful, and sort of this strategy that connects to that too. I would imagine if you go into a planning, we'll talk about this too later, but a strategic planning session at some point, and you sit down and you go, okay, well, our objective is to acquire more customers who then we're going to convert to be loyal, and that's how we're going to win. We're going to decrease churn and that kind of thing. But if you then change the question and go, okay, well, how do we get people to be more habitual about us? It's a different thing. It changes the strategy, doesn't it?
It does. So when your marketing folks come in and say, to get more loyalty, we have got to have a super exciting new brand. Our brand and our logo has been around for a long time, and that's really not what's going to make people really grab onto us. So let's do a refresh. Let's change our logo, right? Let's change our brand name. It used to be green. Let's make it orange instead. If you had habit in mind, you would absolutely, positively not do any of that. That would be the last thing you do, because all of those things are causing the conscious to have to engage and say, the thing we habitually liked, that old thing with the old brand and with the brand we've known and love, it's not old to me, the brand we know and love, that we really trust, that's gone away. It's disappeared. It doesn't exist anymore. And so now we ought to think, should I go with this new brand, or should I try kind of something else? Because I got to do something new now. So kind of should I do it? And this isn't just sort of kind of theoretical. Like this happened to me. So I'm a sportsaholic, right? And I had my favorite sports app. And for one reason or another, I used CBSSports.com. But CBSSports.com kept redoing their web page, improving their web page so that how you navigated was different. The look and feel was different. The last time they did their refresh, because somebody said, well, we got to refresh the website and make it new. I just sort of gave up and said, even though I've always used CBS for several years, CBSSports.com, I'm now going to troll through the major sports sites and see which I'm going to try out. I was gone. And I picked ESPN.com, which I probably should have been with anyway. The bigger it's bigger. But they just, thanks to them improving the website, they lost me because they made me think. They took away the thing that my subconscious said, Roger, you want to check the scores. It's a tile on your iPhone. Don't be an idiot. Click that. But my subconscious had to throw in the towel and say, all right, conscious, Roger, the beloved CBS Sports that used to be in that tile has disappeared. And it's been replaced with something you don't know and you don't understand, and you're going to have to figure out. So it's now fair game for me to check out whether there's another website that I might try. And do you think I'm coming back? You don't know,
unless ESPN changes everything, maybe.
Exactly, unless ESPN. So possession of a habit is 9/10 of the law or more. And so ESPN now has got to screw up for me, but then all I'll do is troll around again, and CBS Sports has got a chance, but not necessarily any kind of advantage. So that's how strategy changes. You are obsessive about, as I say, it's sort of like Hansel and Gretel. You've got to put the breadcrumbs close enough together so people don't get lost, right? So CBS Sports could have done a better job of putting the breadcrumbs really closely together, and maybe modifying the site 10 times over a year to get it to where it wanted to be, where none of them was so disturbing to me that I had to throw up my hands, and the subconscious had to give up and let this conscious battle go on.
Mm-hmm.
I think that even this example that you just provided actually perfect lines up to the question that we had here for you, Roger. And in the book, you talk about cumulative advantage. Yes. Essentially, you're suggesting by keeping customers loyal is not about continually adapting to the changing needs, but instead helping customers avoid making that choice, as you clearly articulated in your previous example. Is there anything you care to even expand on that even more? Because I know if there's a marketer that's reading that right now, it's like, well, we have to change to make sure that we are adapting, but it's the why you're changing to adapt.
Yes.
Right.
And how you're doing it, how you're doing it is the key. So an example, and we use it in the book, is Tide. So if you ask the question, so Tide has followed this, the leading detergent brand in America by far, North America, its equivalent Ariel leading in other parts of the world. And you'd say, okay, so they've followed this guideline and haven't changed at all. Well, my Tide growing up was big boxes of white fluffy powder. My Tide now is a tub of these cute little pods that have all the ingredients in it. Massive change, right? Massive change along the way. But what has stayed exactly the same?
Packaging.
Color. Packaging.
Color.
It's orange. Logo. Target. Script. The same. The same. Marketing message. Right. This will get your clothes cleaner and whiter, and take care of your clothes. If you want to be a good parent and have your kids having clean clothes when they go to school, this will do it. So a consistent message, a consistent positioning through monumental form change, that is cumulative advantage, right? So that is 76 now years of advantage in being in going along and having that customer not feel like they've been jerked around. But it's not without kind of bumps in the road, right? Back in the 70s, when the first liquid detergents appeared, Procter & Gamble, super smart guy, said, this is such a new form, we better have a new brand for this. And so Procter & Gamble's first liquid detergent was not Liquid Tide, it was Era. A new era. It was a clever name, clever concept, all of that, all that kind of stuff. It didn't sell at all. It was a disaster. So here you have the leading powder detergent is going to be blown out because it cannot make the transition to liquid. Lots of people would say, that's the way it goes. Disruption. What was the clever little thing that they did in response to that? How about having orange bottles with a target on the front, the name Tide, and how about calling it something really exotic, weird, and frame-breaking called Liquid Tide, right? Talk about the breadcrumbs being like the breadcrumbs were touching one another, right? They weren't here or to the other side of the room. They were touching one another. And what happened? Within a couple of years, Liquid Tide was by far and away the number one selling liquid detergent, and Liquid Tide has dominated that segment. How about later on you figure out how to have Tide wash in cold water as well as it washes in hot water. And you come out with cold water Tide. When they came out with put bleach in it, it was Tide with bleach, cold water Tide. They learned that lesson, the Tide lesson, right? But again, clever as they were, they hadn't learned the color lesson, the color cues. And this is something only in the last, again, 15 or 20 years, do we really understand how much color is a cue to you of that's familiar, because you see the color before you see the logo or the name typically on the shelf. So because orange is a hot color, You want to make it a blue bottle, right? Makes sense, right? What does that make sense to, right? The logical mind. The 5% above the waterline. Blue, cold, orange, hot, perfect. What does the subconscious say? Ain't tide, baby. Ain't tide. Sorry. Disaster. Great product, disaster results. What do you think they did? Boom, orange bottle, number one cold water detergent by far, right? So these are just sort of classic examples of, are you appealing to the below the waterline subconscious or the conscious? And the answer is you better darn well appeal to the subconscious, or bad things will happen to you. Cold water Tide, just because it's in a blue bottle, right, is back to the starting line, just like I was with my sports apps. I was just right back to the starting line saying, okay, what cold water detergent do I want to use? This entirely new to the world thing called cold water Tide in these blue bottles, or whatever Unilever's product or whoever else's Arm & Hammer's product, or Henkel's product. Back to the starting line. You switch. You literally switch it to orange, and there at the starting line, you're running the 400 meter kind of dash, and you get to start at 300. Like, who's going to win that one, right? Yeah, you are. So why toss out that huge advantage and get put at the starting line with everybody else?
It makes me think about, going back to the strategy part, like if you believe in loyalty, then you make potentially bigger risks, like the blue bottle, or like the classic Tropicana example, where you go, oh, people are going to keep drinking Tropicana even if we completely change the packaging. Yeah. But if you believe in habit, then you go, we can't disrupt that pattern that people are expecting. And actually, V and I had a conversation a little while ago about, what is a brand, and we were referencing some of the work you'd done about generating confidence, and I think there's a connection there too, right? About, you're trying to keep the confidence that you have with people, so they don't have to think, and they can just use the brand as the shortcut to go, okay, I know it's going to be cleaner, it's going to work great, it's all those other things that have been built up in my mind, and now it's liquid, or now it's cold, and so you're more protective if you think about habit, I would imagine.
Yes, you are. But again, the thing to remember, all the things that you said, Mark, of what the mind is thinking are almost entirely subconscious, right? Sure. So the mind isn't consciously thinking all those things you thought. It's you've won when the subconscious is just saying, and the subconscious will kind of run the show. And until you shatter the subconscious, right? Yeah. So CBSSports.com shattered my subconscious, right? My subconscious had to say, I give up here. Conscious, you go do whatever the hell you want, because they took away, they made it impossible for me to have the thing that the subconscious wanted. I just wanted to tap on that tile, and I wanted it to open up and look the way it always looked, and they took that away. So I give up. Go, just do whatever you want. It's almost like that's what the subconscious does, and that's what that's what my subconscious does every time. So I grew up in an era where Holiday Inn. We went on road trips as a family, and I stayed at Holiday Inns, and I loved the Holiday Inn logo, right? And then then some branding expert kind of changed it, right? And it's funny. That was about 10 or 15 years ago, and it still pisses me off whenever I see it. I hate that look. I hate it, right? And it's irrational, right? Like, I should get over it. This is not. I don't stay in Holiday Inns anymore. It's not terribly relevant to my life. But every time I'm driving by and see that logo, and I say, "What did those idiots do to exactly to my logo? I'm not rational. That's my subconscious saying, you took it away.
Yeah.
You took something away, threw it in the dumpster, and replaced it with that.
Yeah.
That. You took my thing away and replaced it with that. So I will never forgive them for my subconscious one. Not that it matters to them, but
yeah.
it's visceral. That's why I make the point. It's really visceral, because and all of this has to do with what we now know about the brain. The brain is the biggest user of energy in the body. You think it's your legs and your arms, whatever, walking to work and your 10,000 steps. Nope. It's your brain. Use 25% of the energy on a day. And so we have been designed to turn that high energy burner off as much as possible. Right. But just think about it. Think about driving to work. Do you guys drive to work?
Well, lately, in the last 2 years,
not
before
really,
COVID,
not anymore.
You drive to work. Just think about the path.
The
path to getting to work, or going to class, or going to play squash or tennis or something. You know, like if your mind had to think about, okay, the steering wheel. Now turn the steering wheel a little bit here because we're going. Oh, we got to turn it. Turn it back. Whatever. And we got to be thinking about is it a left turn coming up or a right? You'd be exhausted by the time you get to tennis, right?
Yeah.
But
and
if you're going to the same tennis, but if you're going, if you've
I don't
done it,
remember getting there.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly.
Yeah,
you because your subconscious has completely in control of it. It knows how much to jiggle the steering wheel at every time and how much, whatever. And it's in some sense doing that so that if there's a little old lady crossing the road on a red light, that your conscious has got enough sort of energy to say, boom, we got to go off plan here completely. Your subconscious is mad, right? It's like, God, this is annoying. This little old lady. But your conscious can act. So you don't want your conscious exhausted. And the way we deal with that is automaticity. That our brain does as much as possible totally automatically.
As the way you're both speaking, another example came to my head in terms of like a fireplace. We have a pilot light that's always on, right? Yep. Before you actually ignite the fireplace to actually use it. You never want to use the fireplace 100% of the time because of all the energy it burns. It takes obviously a lot out of one. So I kind of see that kind of like the automaticity that you're talking about is literally like the pilot light being on. And when you need that burner on, well, that's when you need, it gets called upon, but you can't have that burner on all the time.
Absolutely. And that's a cool advance to cars, right? My vehicle now, when I'm sitting at a stoplight, turns the engine off, but it's the minute I touch the pedal, it's already geared up to say we got to get started again, but it doesn't use the energy while I'm sitting at a stoplight.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating area because especially when you think about, going back to the customer centricity part and how many people and businesses talk about that. One of the things about the model that you're talking about building habit, it really makes you think differently about how customers actually behave, and not just that they're going to be loyal and they're going to come to us, and that you just got to make these people like, religious fanatics of our brand. It's not that. It's just habit, and it's so much subtler, and it's fascinating.
And I would argue, Mark, that many of these customer-centric companies are centered on the customer's conscious. Right? They'll do all these things for the customer's conscious, right? But they ignore their customers' unconscious. They're actually nasty to the customer's unconscious, and they can be nasty in kind of intriguing ways. So So the commercials that tend to win at the con, every year there's just like the Cannes Film Festival, there's a commercial festival. Will win the Golden Lion for the best commercials. All those commercials are always sophisticated, complicated storylines, right? That get you laughing or what have you, and they're what wins. There is no correlation between what wins and what's effective. And the reason is most of them are far too complicated for the customer's subconscious to care about and follow. That's why the best commercials show the subconscious in simple ways what you want the subconscious to do. That's why beer commercials. What is the feature of virtually every beer commercial you've ever seen in your life? What do people in the beer commercial do?
They're always partying,
Yeah.
having fun.
Drink beer is the answer.
And drink beer, yeah.
Drink beer,
Yeah.
right?
In all different kind of scenarios. Yeah.
Yes. And what's even better, I pay attention to odd things, but there's a liqueur called Di Serono. They've had the cleverest ads from my perspective, because the ads are simply somebody at a bar saying, "I'll have a Di Serono, please." The more literal you can be in instructing the subconscious, the better. That is simple, and it tells the subconscious what to do. There should be many more ads of a person in a grocery store, let's say, or kind of a Walmart. The ad is simply a person picking off the shelf your product and putting it in their cart.
Yeah. It's like
Now, for the conscious, you'd say, well, that's boring. Boring is good. For the subconscious, boring is extremely good, because the subconscious wants comfort, and the subconscious wants simple connections. And so next time you watch like a sophisticated ad that requires you to sit, like a 60-second one that requires you to sit through it and understand the storyline and you finally get to the point, 1 in 50 people are probably actually listening with enough care to that ad for it to have any impact. But it'll win an award, and people will say,
"Yeah,
that's so clever. Oh, wasn't that funny?"
Yeah,
right.
Roger, in terms of simple connections, you just mentioned, I just wanted to make this simple connection and talk about a couple of the other sections of the book. So you made a connection, or I before mentioned strategic planning, which is often combined. And in the book, strategy, planning, and execution are 3 separate chapters.
Yes.
And it's a really compelling case that you make that strategy and execution are the same, but strategy and planning are not. And yet we always say strategic planning together, and we always do the annual strategic plans. Can you talk about that part of it, just why they're different, or why the two are different, and why strategy and execution are the same?
Sure. So, in some sense, strategy and strategic planning shouldn't be different, but they are, and that's because what I see in practice in the world of strategic planning is an exercise to come up with a series of initiatives that the company is going to commit to. And often the way it happens is you have a meeting and you have all the functions or all the regions or all the product areas together, and they all sort of come forward with what they'd like to spend money or capital on, and you negotiate and come up with a list of things. Okay, so Marc's business, we're going to give $260 million to because he wants to build a new plant, and V's business, we're going to give $180 million because he wants to run an ad campaign, and blah, 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 blah. And so it's, and everybody feels super comfortable that, we've hammered it out and we have this set of initiatives, right? And that's de facto the definition of strategic plan that I see in practice. All it has to be is a set of initiatives that is agreed upon to go and do. A strategy, to me, is an integrated set of choices. So we make a bunch of choices that have the effect of picking a place where we are going to play, and therefore places where we're not going to play, and a theory for how we are going to be better there than anybody else who's in that space, right? And those two are different things. What that is integrated, not a list. It has a specific outcome in mind, a competitive outcome in mind, right? That we will, in that space, be superior to our competitors. The others has no outcome in mind other than we're going to finish the initiative. Marc is going to build his factory, and we will pat Marc on the back if it comes in at 260 million, not 280 or 300 because you didn't manage the budget enough. V, if his advertising campaign is 180 million and he gets these many gross rating points that he planned in that, the outcome there has little, if anything, to do with a competitive outcome. And that's why kind of most strategic plans don't accomplish kind of what the company sort of generally hopes for, right? The company has sort of a general hope for, if we do all these things, things will be better, things will be good. But they typically aren't because there wasn't any sort of standard applied to them other than V thinks that an advertising campaign is good, and V is going to go out and do his advertising campaign. That's the totality of the logic behind it. And I would say the vast majority of initiatives I've ever seen on the many, 40 years of seeing strategic plans, there's very few that you could sort of argue independently of that thing. It's a really stupid idea, right? So they tend to be sensible, laudable, right. As I say, it's a laudable list. But then they don't add up. If you add them up and say, well, where will we be versus our competition? The answer is typically, the hell if I know. That isn't a concern. And what's the problem with that? It's because somebody else is thinking about strategy, and they're thinking about doing things that will make sure that after Vass's advertising campaign is finished and your factory is built, that your factory doesn't have the cost position necessary to support the outcome that you want. And Vass's advertising campaign was 1/8 as big as the dominant competitor he's going after, and will be completely washed out, and nothing good will happen to your financials or your market share or the degree to which customers prefer you. And that's why the vast majority of strategic planning is a delusional waste of time. The delusion is, if we do this list, good things will happen. It won't, unless you're competing against dreadful companies, which in some industries is true, so you get away with it. But the minute you're competing against somebody awesome, they will simply eat your lunch. I mean, simply and clearly eat your lunch.
That's a very interesting point there. And I think to try to make this tangible for the marketers that are listening, would you suggest, and again, you've advised for some of the biggest companies here in North America, but the strategy then need to be done annually, or do you add a time frame to that to do it the right way? In your experience, what have you seen that works for organizations?
Sure. Well, what I say is strategy should be a problem-solving exercise, right? So you should use strategy as a tool whenever you have a problem. And by problem, I mean a gap between what you wish would happen and what is happening now, the results you're achieving now versus what you wish. And anytime there's a gap between those two things, you should engage in a strategy exercise about that problem. And you know, Vass, if you're running the widget business, and it's part of Marc's huge conglomerate, and you've got a problem in the widget business, you shouldn't wait for Marc to say, "Oh, Vass, it's strategy time. It's October. It's strategy time." You should just, independent of anything that Marc is saying, should say, "I got a problem. I've got to ask, what's a set of choices that would put us in a position that is what I want rather than what I'm getting." So there is no, I cannot give any time frame cycle to it. It is four problems. And for that reason, I think in any large company, there should be strategy kind of work going on perpetually, because there's going to be some business that has got some kind of challenge, or some region or some function that needs to be thinking about it. And once you get into that, if everybody in the organization is solving problems by making choices all the time, in due course, right, you will have a powerful, successful company.
Right.
Yeah. You've got this great line in here about strategy, and about what counts isn't what's true, it's what would have to be true.
Yeah. So
can you expand on that?
Sure. So what everything has sort of an origin story, I guess, and the origin of the strategy field, business strategy, not military strategy, was Bruce Henderson, in my view, the founder of Boston Consulting Group, founded it in 1963. And BCG was founded as an extremely analytical firm, right? They would, in the early days, because it was Boston-based, they would go to Harvard Business School and hire the Baker Scholars, who were the best analysts, and they liked engineers as undergrads, and Baker Scholars from Harvard Business School. And since they were monumentally successful, the industry sort of kind of followed that. And what that meant is that the focus was on analyzing so as to be able to determine what is true. Right? So let's analyze all our product lines. Oh, this one is more profitable than that one. Or in the case of BCG, let's look at the learning curve and see what our cumulative production have been in our cost path, and let's look at that for all of our other competitors. So it's analyzing the past, right? And that's asking what's true. Now that's not kind of completely uninteresting, but it doesn't help you create the future, right? If you think about analyzing what's true today, it does not help you create something that does not now exist, right? You don't create the iPod on the basis of analyzing the past. What you have to do is imagine possibilities in the future, and then ask the question, well, what would have to be true for that to come about, right? Because the greatest strategies make things true that weren't true already. So, and you have a MP3 player with a little wheelie on it that's white, and have people pay 3 times as much for it as equally technically good MP3 players, and get the dominant market share and expand the MP3 player business dramatically. Can you do that? And the answer is kind of like no, unless you make something true that was not currently true. You make it super easy for people to download songs onto that little wheelie thing, so that the experience is completely different than anything they have now. And that means creating an iTunes kind of store and a system for doing that. So you make something true that simply wasn't. There was no way to do that on your MP3 player before the iPod. Didn't exist, right? I mean, the kludgy way you had to get stuff on it was you had to take your own music and hook up the cables and put it onto the machine. You couldn't sort of download it in some simple fashion at a buck a song. Mm-hmm. So what you have to ask is, what would have to be true for this to be an awesome idea, for this to be an awesome thing that succeeds, so that you can ask the question, can we make those things true? And in the case of Steve Jobs, he said, yes, we can. We can set up this service. We can do the contractual deals with all the record companies and blah, blah, blah. And we'll split it from albums down to individual songs, blah, 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 blah. Off you go. And you make a bunch of things true. And that's what great strategy is. Mm-hmm. But to figure out what you need to make true, you have to ask the question, what would have to be true for this idea to be a super successful idea?
Yeah.
And that's why it's the most important question in the strategy. What would have to be true?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And it kind of connects to, well, it does connect a lot to what we were talking about in the last podcast, but we were talking about data and it's always in the past, and then innovation. And in this book, like, this is the part where you literally spell out almost step by step a whole workshop on how to come up with possibilities, which is amazing. Yeah. And one of the examples I think the example was with Oil Valet, and they created 5 possible outcomes for the brand. And it's almost like, the way I was thinking of it, it's almost like you're creating scenarios where you're probing for data points that would point you in a direction that would help you de-risk a potential solution, or eliminate ones that are, obviously not great. Like, maybe it wasn't possible for various reasons to do an iTunes store.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Why is it so important to have multiple choices?
Well, I guess I don't listen to a whole lot of people, but I listen to some of the greats, and that's because Aristotle said so. The greatest scientist in the history of mankind said, smart dude for sure. Yeah, smart in so many ways. It's scary, but so what he says is that sort of humans can operate in 2 modes, in 2 sort of domains. One is the domain of where things cannot be other than they are, right? So I often say, if I've got a pen in my hand and I let go of it, it falls. Why does it fall? It falls because there's a universal force called gravity. Is that universal force going to be around next week? Yeah. Next week? Yeah. 100 years from now? Yeah. In that part of the world, right, anything that you analyze in the past is fully representative of what will happen in the future. So when we did a whole bunch of observation of how pens fall, we came to the conclusion that there is a universal force called gravity. If we let them go, here's how fast it accelerates, so we can estimate speed, all of that kind of stuff. That's human's job. But Aristotle said there's another part of the world where things can be other than they are. And that's the world that business is in, right? Think of all the products and services that you have now that you didn't have when you were a teenager, right? It's constantly changing, right? And so he said, in that part of the world, the job of human beings is not to analyze, to determine the cause of the effects that we see. It's to imagine possibilities for what could be that does not now exist, and then choose the one for which the most compelling argument can be made. So I go for multiple possibilities because Aristotle said so, right? Aristotle said it should be a contest between possibilities. And he had a whole bunch of instruction on how you should run that contest, essentially. What you want to do is make an argument for each one. And I make the argument, the methodology that I've created for that is to ask the question, what would have to be true? So you lay out in the most clear and simple terms, what is the logic behind it? Because it's in the future, we have no data about it yet, right? So it's a competition among the logics of various possibilities. And if you have only one possibility, the chances are you're just going to fall in love with it because it's your only hope, if you will. That's why I prefer to have multiple. And I mean, I guess the other thing, because I do all this work in integrative thinking, that I've noticed with having multiple possibilities is that often by having them, you can combine them in ways you wouldn't have thought of until you saw the possibilities, and then say, gee, could we take part of that one and part of that one and create this new one? Again, that wouldn't happen if you only have one possibility that you're thinking about. So that's why the multiple possibilities.
When Mark and I were going back comparing notes and whatnot, there was one subtle thing that I think kind of came to life, if you will, for both of us. And it's actually perfect in the sense of what you're currently articulating. But, you know, as marketers, what we're going to usually do, we're going to look at things from a problem statement, issue that problem statement, then we're going to go off and strategize and whatnot. Are we out to lunch in suggesting that it's maybe not so much identifying that problem statement, but it's reframing that thought process and saying, maybe we need to identify the problem statement as a choice instead. So what are those choices that you want to create for your brand, your service, whatever the case may be, and then solve for that, versus being so maybe myopic and just trying to tackle this one problem in this one way. Did we potentially understand the literature in that context?
No. I think your understanding is very good. I often think of just imagining choices. So I do believe that you should start with the problem and say, because that's sort of your objective function. If I can't make that problem go away, what the hell have I done here anyway? Or if I've made it worse,
that's fair.
Well, that wasn't much worth it. So start with the problem, but you've sort of crossed the proverbial Rubicon when you frame a choice, right? It's so, I don't know what that paper mill in that, single business town is not making money.
Right.
We have a problem there. And you can just sort of say, well, that's just a problem and let's study the problem. My going to say, let's imagine choices we can make. We shut it down. We have to toss all those people in that town out of work, destroy the town. You say, whoa, okay, that's a real choice. Or we could invest $2 billion into, tearing it down and building the most state-of-the-art thing. But that's $2 billion, and we'd have to issue some more debt to do or whatever it is. At that point, you say, okie dokie, here we have got a really big choice, and you get very serious about the fact that it's a choice of that magnitude that you're going to have to make. So you've sort of crossed the Rubicon. You can't kind of go back and say, oh, let's get a group to study that. It's sort of like, no. We've got to make a choice here. So reframing your problem as a choice. And the way I say it to people is think of the outcomes you're achieving now, whatever they are. They're a function of all the choices you've made in the past. You may have made a choice 25 years ago that is partly a choice that you made 3 years ago, a choice that you made last week. All of those choices together put you where you are now. And we know the definition of insanity, right? Is I think you do more of the same and get a different result. You're right. So those choices are very unlikely to get you a markedly different result. I mean, it may evolve a little bit, but remarkably. So therefore, if you want that outcome to change to something closer to your aspiration, you will need to make a new set of choices. Let's imagine different choices that you could make that would have the possibility of making that go away. I'm not saying just give me choices that you are absolutely positively sure and have all the data to say it. No. Right. Give me anything. And if I'm facilitating this and Mark and Vas come up with really close to home ones, I'll be saying to people, okay, that's okay. I want crazy. I want crazy. I'm not gonna stop until I get something that everybody here thinks that's kind of crazy. So I try to encourage people to imagine possibilities that create a greater dispersion than what the two of you might have come up with if you're the plant manager of us and you're the VP HR or something, Mark, and both of you sort of are going to be closer to home. I'd say I want something wacky, and until I get good dispersion, I will not continue the exercise.
What I like about that is, we talk about what would have to be true. Oftentimes when you say to somebody, think outside of the box or come up with crazy, then it's so easily dismissed because there's no substance behind it. Yeah. But then when you say what would have to be true, it forces you to be a bit more disciplined in your approach to crazy, because yes, it is crazy from where we're at today, but it is possible if we were able to do blah, blah, blah.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. Two things I would say to that is, one, when facilitating that kind of discussion, if anybody says anything negative about somebody's possibility, I slap them down really hard. I just say, that's not allowed. That's not on. And why? It's not trying to protect the idea from being processed appropriately, but that's not helpful now, right? And it's because of what you said, Mark. What I want instead to do is say the positive thing, which is what would have to be true, because every idea is a great idea, right? If a set of things are true, right? We can worry later about whether those things are or not true. In fact, in the next step we will. But what I want to have is everybody on the same page, saying everybody, even the most skeptical. So V, let's say you think Mark's idea is insane. I still want you, V, to be able to say, I would put my hand on my heart and do Mark's idea if this were true about the industry and about customers and about capabilities and about our competitors. That set of things were true. And I won't stop until the most skeptical person, V, in this case, agrees that he would support that fully 100% if the following were true. Because then you have the logic all laid out, where you have an entire management team all saying, we agree 100% on the logic. If those things were true, we'd do it. Then I do turn around, do a 180 and say, okay, V, of all those things we just listed, those 9 things we just listed that would have to be true, what are you most worried about being true? And V may say, customers don't believe that. Customers will not care. They will not give a damn about that. And so that house of cards is going to fall down. I think, fantastic. But Mark here thinks that customers will. How are we going to get that question, some insight into that question, so that we will know whether that thing that would have to be true is so unlikely to be true, we got to eliminate that option. Or while that might not be true today, here's how we could spend 25 million or 50 million or something to make that true. In which case, V, you'd start to feel, you know what? If we can do that, that would be good. Whereas your initial response was, that's stupid. And if I let you play the that's stupid card and eliminate that before we ask what would have to be true, that one is in the mists of time and it's gone forever and it had never had a chance. That's why I say I want to have a possibility kill itself, not be killed by a person, right? A possibility kills itself if Mark and V say, well, here's the kind of the customer exploration we need to do on this front. We go out and do some work, do some prototyping, or do a test pilot, and it comes back a disaster, right? Then Mark, not V, will say, damn it, I thought that had a shot, but it didn't. And then Mark is not spending the rest of his life saying V's the nasty guy who killed my idea, right?
Damn you, V.
Sorry, man.
But that's what you want to avoid. You want to have a management team who build together, right? And get more together as a team as you go forward, rather than get more and more at each other, kind of butting heads.
Roger, I know we have about
That's a fair
5
point.
minutes left. So I want to be respectful of your time, but connecting to this idea was this other section about knowledge work, which is fascinating. And we're not going to get into it too deep, but as we're talking about making choices, I never made the connection until as we were having this conversation now, but like with all these choices, you now have to make decisions eventually, which is the process that you're kind of outlining. And you talk about how, there's this rise of knowledge workers, and we've all kind of heard that from back in the day in Peter Drucker, but you've got some numbers in terms of SG&A versus COGS showing like the investments in knowledge work. And now this leading to decision factories. And so there's an output and an efficiency that you could look at when you're looking at an organization. I just thought maybe you could touch on that, because it's such an interesting idea, and about knowledge work and about how it's different. Sure.
Well, I mean, I guess I like to step back and ask, if you've got a big company, I don't know, let's say you've got a big bank, like one of the big Canadian banks, the Royal Bank or Bank of America in the US. You've got traditional factories. Those are called branches. They're service factories, right? And they can operate, and people walk into them and do transactions and whatever. But then you've got these big office towers in Toronto or Charlotte, North Carolina for B of A. What happens in those office towers? And the way I think about it is, they don't manufacture services or products, right? They don't. Those are manufactured in branches, or they're manufactured in factories for, if it's a Procter & Gamble or a Ford or a Lego, companies I work with, they've got actual factories making physical products. What do those people in the office towers do? What I would say is they manufacture decisions. Right? They're the people who manufacture decisions. They manufacture decisions about what are we going to produce, at what price, how are we going to market it, what R&D are we going to do to improve it. Those are all choices that those people manufacture, that guide what goes on in the actual product or service factories. And so I'm then intrigued to ask, well, how does that factory run? Well, you've got raw materials that they have. Those tend to be like figures and data and reports, and then they manufacture partially finished goods, which are things like reports that they've come up with, and then they have a manufacturing process, which is called a meeting, where you get together and talk about the report, and you have finished goods, which are supposedly decisions that you haven't done anything with, and then you take those finished goods and kind of take action on them, and then I ask the question, compared to like a branch, if we're talking about B of A or Royal Bank, how efficient is that? So if a teller or a customer service rep, as they are now, customer service rep is serving a customer, and the customer brings some stuff to them, and they perform an operation, and then have to say to the customer, I'm not sure if I'm actually going to deposit that for you. Could you go over there and wait for a couple of hours while I decide whether I'm really certain or not? And I'm going to talk to some of the other colleagues about whether I'm going to deposit that in the account you want or not. And so the person sits back there, and then comes back 2 hours later and says, we're getting close. We're getting close to a decision here, but we're thinking more about it. Like that customer would A, never come back, or B, punch you in the face, or do something. Oh, no, only Will Smith does that.
Will Smith will do that.
Will Smith will do that. So it would be unthinkable, but that's what happens all the time in the knowledge factory.
That's true.
The decision factory is you have massive amounts of rework where you come and get together to make a decision, and then you don't, and you send people back to do more rework and everything. So I think the interesting thing is that now there are more of the wage bill for most companies tends to be in the decision factories than the product or service factories, and they're run horribly, unbelievably inefficiently, and that's why, in my view, that's why productivity growth has slowed down so much. There are more people in the places where the productivity is horrible and not getting any better soon. And so and what I think we need to do is and I talk about it in the book is completely rethink the way our decision factories work. Rather than trying to sort of optimize them in their current form, it's to rethink them entirely.
Yeah, such a good take. I like, it's so interesting seeing all these individual, and I love the book also because you can read each section. You don't have to. It's not a beginning to end book. You can kind of choose your own adventure. No, it's great.
Yeah, I hope it's sort of like a manual that people will keep on their shelf to pull out when they say, wasn't there a chapter about, I'm about to make a capital investment decision? Isn't there a chapter on how to think about think about that? And they pull it out, and then each chapter is probably, what do you think? I don't know, 20 to 30 minute read maybe for a chapter, so they can pull it up and in 20 or 30 minutes read about that chapter, rather than having to commit themselves to, in order to solve this problem, I'm going to have to read this entire book, and that's going to be whatever, a day,
10 hours or
a day and a half or something like that. So that's the hope. It's a reference guide to better models for better decisions.
So great. Thanks, Roger.
This was awesome. This was awesome.
Well, you guys are so much fun. I enjoyed doing the last one. I enjoyed doing this one. I would be happy to do another one.
That'd be great. We'll definitely chat with you again soon.
Well, we'll be in touch for sure.
Is there so and I mean, Amazon, I know it will be available then. What's the date that it will be available for everyone?
May 3rd is the pub date, so you can pre-order on Amazon and lots of other places right now, and I look forward to hearing back. One of the funner things about writing is that, well, people will write me stuff about the book, ask questions about it. So I'm looking forward to May 3rd as it gets in more people's hands. And I'm glad to see the physical copies just arrived last week, and so I'm glad you guys have your physical copies. It'll be fun to have that in people's hands very soon.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we link to it and everything as well. So yeah, this was awesome, Roger. Really appreciate you taking the time once again.
Not at all. You take care, gentlemen.
Time for the post-pod discussion with Marc and V.
We always do this. We start talking and then we're like, shit, we got to hit record.
Like, oh my gosh, remember, this is why we do the post-pod. Is to talk about it. What an amazing book. What an amazing book.
It is a really good book. He talked about it too. I mean, I love books where you can do something with it.
Yes.
And literally there's in the strategy section, like I almost wanted to break down the workshop, or what I imagine the workshop, or like a process, if you want to call it, about generating strategic choices. Because you can literally take almost the template from his book and put it into your PowerPoints or your slides or whatever, and create that framework, or steal his framework. It's so good.
It's, I'm trying to put it in a very simplified way. Like, going through this book for me was not only, as we were prepping for the podcast, I was reading it differently because I'm trying to pull nuggets to create questions and whatnot. So you're really kind of thinking about it, going through the literature, maybe not in the same capacity as if you were just reading the book. I'm going to go back and read the book for just simply reading and trying to absorb as much as I can, because, we focused on 3 key areas, which are, I think he does an incredible job in articulating and really kind of giving us, our readers, our listeners, if you will, a lot of great frameworks. But there's so much nuggets in here, and between the two podcasts, you could see a lot of the ties. You know, he talked about Aristotle again, right? And it's one of those things where this is not linear. Anything that's in this book can be applied by executives, by directors, managers. You can mold it, and actually it's been written in a way that for everyone to really understand. So in my opinion, this is like I don't know, call it a Bible for management and strategic thinking here for the next 10, 15 years.
Totally. Yeah, I think so. I think that's 100% accurate. And I mean, we covered like a very surface level depth of some of the like big topics. I mean, we got into probably the customer the most. But I mean, there's just so much depth to this, and especially like I'm just looking through some of these quotes. I mean, that we were given, like it literally is a how-to guide for building organizations, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really, really interesting. It because of his experience in consulting and working with other organizations like P&G, like Lego, like you
Ford.
know, these big Ford. I mean, it's not theoretical either. It's
no.
I mean, I think going back to that example, there's tons of examples from P&G. Like literally, the work that he did with P&G on oil valet is in the book. Like it's not. It's a legitimate case study. It's not a thought experiment.
No,
it's so good.
Well, I really, for me, and I know we talked about it in the pod as well, but there's a reason I kind of really emphasize that cumulative advantage, because I think that notion really spoke to me in a way that, you know, not only did it make it tangible because he brought really great examples. He talked about MySpace and Facebook, right? What created that change when MySpace was the company that was running the show at the time, but then you had Facebook that was designed for habit. You know, there's a lot of consistency in UI. You know, there's a lot of things that go into that. And, you know, he touches on, what was it? 4 things under cumulative advantage. It's like, it's important to be able to become popular early. That always helps. But you have to make sure you're designing for habit. Then you stay innovative within the brand, and then keep communication simple. That framework is very simple. How do you actually set up your brand? How do you set up that cumulative advantage? Well, here's how. These 4 things. This is what you do. So you're talking about a workshop. Well, when you're having a strategy meeting, hey guys, we need to create a cumulative advantage. Let's define these 4 things.
Yeah.
I don't know how easier that gets.
Yeah, and the other part that I really like about the book is that it builds on a lot of other ideas that are out there, or integrates them. Maybe not builds on, but integrates them at the very least. Like, you know, I've mentioned Ehrenberg Bass Institute and a lot of the work they've been doing, and so I mean, there's stuff in there that I think is really, really valuable from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, which, you know, specifically around the ideas of loyalty, and said differently from Roger, but the idea of habit versus loyalty, and what he's saying is, you know, there's some. I mean, you can go into the literature now and see all the publications from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, the scientific journals and everything, marketing research that articulate the proof points of what Roger's talking about. Yeah. So I love how that connects. And then there's Dan Ariely, who's done a lot of work in the behavioral economists group of people on cumulative advantage. I'm trying to remember the name of the model, but I mean, what I like about what Rogers is saying is that it's a very practical application of all these other ideas. Yeah. And so for anyone that's interested in Ehrenberg Bass or interested in behavioral economics, I mean, like, you're going to love this book for sure.
Well, we're creatures of habit. He puts it, you know, right in the book. And I think as marketers, do we actually think about habits? We don't. Do we think about potentially any decision that we make? Are we disrupting habits that may have been there or whatnot? We don't. We're naturally being trained in this mindset that, you know, innovation, keep pushing. What's the next shiny thing? It has to happen in moderation. I'm not saying you have to stop evolving. You have to continue to evolve 100%. But it's probably, I think we have to be more conscious of habits around the brand, expectations around the brand, And anything that we say or do from a business perspective, not even a marketing perspective, this is like strategic business decisions that may disrupt that. I think we have to make sure that we're sounding that horn or from our respective spaces and like, hey, this may not work because of this habit that's already been established.
For sure.
I think it's an afterthought. I really do.
Yeah. Well, and some of the premise of the book really is about, I'm trying to find this one quote here about, do you own your models or do your models own you is kind of the premise of the book. And so when you think about like strategic planning as an annual process, I mean, that's a model and that owns, I think, a big portion of an executive team or any company, because of course, in places that you and I have worked, I think that's a common thing where you go, okay, well, it's the time for your annual plans. And there's strategic planning sessions that happen every year. But it makes you think now, when I kind of roll back my memory banks to the meetings that you and I have been in and the ones that we've, separately and together. I mean, very few of them were making decisions. Most of them is just kind of like, okay, well, here's our number for to hit next year. How are we going to do that? And that's, I think, to his point, more planning. It's not strategy. And so it really forces us, unless we're having to choose between two separate options with the goal of achieving X number of percentage increase in market share or whatever, market penetration, it probably isn't actually strategy. It's probably just planning.
I love that you brought that up, because first of all, he does a great job in the book to kind of like distinguish between the two things. And I think you were right in asking this very simple question. It's like, well, I think that businesses naturally put them together. I think one becomes a byproduct of another. So having a sound strategy session, then you have to do a planning session, right? How does this going to go? So we've decided on the choice. We've decided on what it is that we're trying to do. Now let's put the wheels in motion, so to speak. Yeah. But I think the problem is they're used interchangeably, unfortunately. And that's the nuance. I actually, in this context, Mark, I don't think I've ever had a strategy meeting. In the context of the way that he's defining it. Yeah. I don't think I've ever had that.
I honestly don't know if I have either.
Right?
I'd have to go. I really have to think about it and see if there's something. Look through my old decks and whatnot. But I don't know.
Because I think in business, it's one of those things that's just become a byproduct of a living, part of it. But we're not actually having those strategic discussions in the same context by, say, offering choice. And what I loved about the way he positioned it, like, problem statements are important, right? But it's reframing those problem statements into statements of choice. Yeah. That second part is probably the thing that not only is missing, because let's solve this problem. We're suffering, or we're hemorrhaging cash, or, we're not able to hit our revenue numbers. Problem statement. Cool. Go solve it. But actually it's, so then people will go and try to build up some business cases and whatnot and bring it back. Right. But, well, what is a desired outcome? So what's choice number one? Well, making sure that we're profitable. Option two, doing double-digit comp growth again. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, now go solve for those problems instead of trying to, just define like, hey, how are we going to increase revenue, as an example? Yeah. It actually future-proofs your business, because you'll probably come up with 5 options.
Totally. Yeah. And that's where it's like the connection between knowledge work. And we didn't talk about some of his solutions that he talked about for knowledge work, which is rather than organizing based on sort of, I'm kind of summarizing what I interpret to be his solution, but, organizing departments by how things were created before, which is a hierarchy. When you had production outputs, when you're investing in widgets and you're having to produce a number of widgets, the organizational structure that is a hangover from that period. And the Frederick Winslow Taylor, efficiency and of motion kind of studies, you segment people out. And instead, one of his suggestions is you flow to work rather than having a specific role that you're working in. You could flow to where work is.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can more like a Hollywood studio or more like an agency does, where people can or have a role for sure, but they may be called upon to do something that's unique and different because that's just where the work is that needs to get done now.
That's a great point.
Anyway, there's so many interesting ideas that are in this book that I really, really love. I'm going to have to start kind of breaking it down, like you said, reread it just for rereading its, sake, and then figuring out how I can apply it to my own job.
It's interesting. This was actually in the introduction. So this is how captivating the book was for me, because I found myself highlighting stuff in the introduction for Pete's sake. Like it's not even into the material yet. And there was one point of that where I quoted, I wrote down a quote. It's a better way of thinking about competition. It happens at the front line more so than the head office.
Mm-hmm.
It's so simple, but the front line's probably not involved in a lot of those strategic decisions when you think about it.
Yeah. Well, I know that's one of the solutions. Yeah. And in the strategy part, that's one of his solutions, is to bring in people from the front line. Because, there are some of those people that could say, well, that's not going to work because of this. Or here's this really cool idea that, it's a great line for sure. So
anyways, the fact we've had him twice, 2 fantastic podcasts from him. We're still fun. He said it again.
So that's what we learned.
We're still fun.
Yeah. And I did tell my wife that, and she laughed.
Of course. We didn't talk about space. We didn't talk about Galaxy Quest.
We didn't talk about Galaxy Quest. Oh man. Yeah.
That was a great
watch
movie.
It though. It was pretty fun.
Me too.
The line from about, this is a dumb job, but I'm gonna do it.
I'm still gonna do it.
That was really funny. Anyway, great pod, V.
This is great, man. This was awesome.
Super fun.
Let's get on to the next one.